Okay, we're back here for the second part on disorganized asocial offenders. And, you know, I shouldn't need to review. You guys can go back and look at that yourself. But I do want to go ahead and talk to you about, some more details about disorganized asocial offenders. And also, some of the stuff I've already mentioned, so I'll kind of gloss over it if it's not a major deal. But either way, just a reminder, these people are loners, and not by choice. It's because they're viewed as being weird or different, strange, whatever. The other people, that's what how the people view them as, or how they view them. So obviously, everybody has their own little intricacies, but there's a difference. There's a difference between someone you're like, oh, well, they're just a little weird or different, hang out with them, and then someone you definitely know something is up with them. Everybody has that kind of crazy or nutty person in their hometown or in their neighborhood, whatever, that something's up with them in their, whether it be their head or maybe they've used a lot of drugs. But nonetheless, that doesn't always mean they're going to be, obviously become a serial killer, but it does. That's the kind of person we're talking about in this particular situation. So, typically they have a lower IQ, not by a lot, and that's another misconception that people tend to have about serial killers. We'll get into, people watch these movies, even though he's a different kind of category, even though he's more of an organized non-social offender. The character of Hannibal Lecter, people are like, oh, well, he has a super high IQ, and that's how all serial killers are. No, that's not the case, and that's not the case for. I don't even watch Criminal Minds because I already have a pretty good idea. They, just like everything else on TV, they make it towards not very realistic. So I don't know, but in all reality, coming back to disorganized asocial offenders, they are slightly below average, and yes, you will get some that are closer to, say like somewhere in the 70s or 80s. But a lot of times, typically, they are going to be, as it states on the screen here, 80 to 95, so just below average. Okay. What it means by here was a product of social and cultural experience. What they're saying is, or they, by reading that, you get the idea that so someone may have average or just slightly below average intelligence, but when you deal with them or you're around them, they seem to have even more issues. It's because their development has been in essence stopped, or it has been stunted somewhere along the way because of whether it be poor nutrition, whether it be a poor experience and environment at home, abuse, things like that, feelings of abandonment, other source of anxiety. Those are all things that you can look at. So understand that that's what it's saying is it's more about the environment that they have or different experiences they've had throughout life, in addition to any IQ issues um, or any type of mental health issues they have. Okay, so says down here, does not date. Well, yeah. How many? Well, guys, I mean, this counts too for weird women because they haven't. But how many? It's easier to talk about this way. How many of you females out there have ever had a guy ask you out and you're like, no, you're kind of, that guy's a weirdo or he's, whatever, nut job. I'm not going to go out with him. Okay. That's essentially what would happen if a lot of these people, if they ever have the nerve to ever ask someone out or try to go on a date with someone, regardless of sexual preference or anything like that, they're going to get turned down because they don't have the social skills to gain any interest from anybody else. Plus, they feel awkward even when they are in something that might be somewhat mutual. Or consensual, though they feel awkward as it is. So they do not like that feeling. They tend to have hiding places in their home. Have serial killers that basically, and it's not just serial killers, but they would have that. They'd have their home places to hide at home. They would have their places. For instance, some of them would get into the autoerotic self-asphyxiation. Can't talk. Asphyxiation. That's what they would get into. and they have their own little private places to do that. But even in general, they won't have a whole lot of other people around. So, all right. So, let's get into from getting the side of peripheral things. Let's get into the really aspects of how can we look at a crime scene and determine, hey, this person's probably disorganized, or how we can do that. So, number one here, lacks the ability to plan the crimes efficiently or effectively. So, this is someone who has a tendency to commit these crimes in an impulsive form. Like, yeah, they have these urges and stuff, but it's more like, and they don't, they may in their mind have an ideal victim, but really they don't think about it that much. They just go with it. Excuse me. And then whoever's there, that victim just happens to be a victim, circumstances. So there's that. They don't typically plan it out very well. So they may not have gloves. They may not, they won't bring their own weapon or devices typically. So whatever they have available to them right then is what they will use. And even if they were to happen to have some type of kit with them, it's not going to be something that they would have planned out in great detail. Is like I said, it becomes more of like a blitzkrieg type of attack. They get kind of this overwhelming feeling like they have to, whether it be kill or rape and then kill or whatever the case is. Everybody has their own little MO and whatnot, but they have this feeling of this urge that they don't control. And with disorganized asocial offenders, they lack that ability, so it becomes very spontaneous when they do attack someone. It may be, instead of waiting for an opportune time, it may be in an alleyway, because that's the best place for them right at that moment. They're not going to they won't have the personality skills to convince someone to go home with them or to a secluded place, unless it's like a prostitute. Then they can at least get them in the car or something along those lines. But then they will feel awkward to do that anyway. So there's that. And if it is an alleyway, they may use some object if they choose to kill the person. They may choose an object they find in the alleyway, whether it be a rock that's back there, a bigger rock. If it's some type of pipe or something that's laying in the alleyway or wherever they're at, parking lot. If they are an intruder into someone's house, if they need to strangle somebody, you don't see a whole lot of phones with cords anymore. So instead of that, you may end up having cable that's around. Either way, they'll find whatever they can. For instance, if there's a lampshade that they end up grabbing, hitting someone up over the head with it, that has a cord attached to it, so if that person is still alive, depends on if that disorganized asocial offender wants to keep the victim alive for a while or not. If they do, they may tie them up with that cord, or at least try to bind them. They may also, if they want to choke them out or kill them, then they would suffocate them with that same cord, the power cord. Those are just options there. We'll get into other things here in a little bit, but definitely blitzkrieg. Oh, another one I did want to point out is if it's blitzkrieg, the disorganized asocial offender is going to be someone who, instead of waiting and attacking someone when they are face to face, they are more apt to attack someone, from behind or when they're not looking. So basically, surprise someone, come up to them as the victim is walking down a sidewalk or getting ready to go into their apartment. Maybe the disorganized asocial offender will kind of wait, and then as that person opens the door, they push them into their own apartment or home, subdue them. And that's something else they feel like it's a necessity is a lot of times they'll tie someone up. So whether they are going to rape them, whether they're going to torture them, or whatever the disorganized asocial offender is going to choose to do, they feel like they aren't confident enough to actually control someone with their own hands or whatever. So they need to put that other person at a disadvantage by tying them up. binding them in some form or fashion. They can also use something to like over their eyes so that they can't see anything. That's blindfold someone. Those are all examples of what you would see more often with a disorganized asocial offender. Also, what you're going to find out is a lot of their crimes occur close to their home, and they occur that or close to their workplace or someplace they visit a lot and are very comfortable with. Since these people already have an issue with confidence of whatever they're doing, they don't feel like they have the ability to branch out and go to these other areas. They go to places they're familiar with. A lot of times you'll find this out in like an apartment complex. They may end up, their victims will be either in that same complex, such as a neighbor, or someone very close. So like usually within even a few blocks, or if they're able to drive very far, it's going to be, like say only within what you can get there in probably less than 10 minutes, or even, like I said, less than that, more than likely, just because they don't feel comfortable with going beyond something that they know well, and they don't have a great desire to, or a great ability to take control of a situation. They have to kind of do what they feel most comfortable with in their home turf areas. So, like I said, it won't venture much beyond, won't go beyond their home or workplace much, or some place where they feel really comfortable. You guys can read that there. Oftentimes, will be in their own neighborhood. Post-defense behaviors, something that we talk about. They return to the crime scene, and here's something, a big point I want to point out about disorganized asocial offenders. The reason they go to the crime scene is different, because you'll find out later that organized also go back to crime scenes at times. But the reason why disorganized asocial offenders go back is because what? They are much more put this way, they're much safer to go back and relive it in their mind, as opposed to trying to do it again. Because you know what? There's a whole lot more danger, and not just getting caught, but the whole social anxiety aspect of it. There's a whole lot more stress to trying to commit that crime with a new victim, as opposed to going back to the safer form of going back and going to the crime scene and reliving it in your mind. They can still get the same satisfaction, or at least something very close to it, and it's much safer for them in their minds. Like, oh, well, I can still relive that moment in a way that is more secure for me. Also, they attend the funerals of sometimes for the same reason. Okay. And they tend to keep visual collections, because they want to relive. That's the whole thing about it. It's not because they're keeping toys, like little trophies or anything like that, because like, oh, look what I did. It's more like reliving what they did. That is easier for them to do. You'll find things like fantasies, written down in their diary. Sometimes they'll have their own little kind of like monologue in there, such as in your book, if you read through it, the Profiling Violent Crimes, there is actually a little part where they talk about that and have one of those in there. Okay, so be sure to read that. If they do move, it's not very far, and they tend to, like I said, want to stay in that same area where they are most comfortable with. Okay. Interviewing techniques, I will let you guys look at that on your own. But one thing to be aware of, you're going to keep the conversation going, because these people, the disorganized asocial offenders, quiet as it is, lack social skills. They're not going to be really talkative in general. Okay. So just keep that in mind. If I can think of anything else, I'll let you know. But the next lesson should be over the organized non-social offender.